Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened in the Strait of Hormuz 3 days ago demands directness. On April 21, 2026, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy conducted what they called a routine navigational exercise. That is what the press release said, that is what Reuters reported, that is what made it into the crawl on CNN for approximately 47 seconds before disappearing entirely from Western media coverage. But that is not what actually happened. I am looking at declassified maritime tracking data that has been circulating among European defense analysts for the past 72 hours, and I need you to understand what this data actually shows. It does not show a routine exercise. It does not show a symbolic demonstration. It does not show Iranian vessels conducting drills in their own territorial waters. What it shows is 23 Iranian naval vessels, including 11 fast attack craft and 4 Ghadir-class submarines, establishing what the International Maritime Organization has described in internal documents as an active denial perimeter across the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrowest point where the shipping lane is 21 nautical miles wide, where 21 million barrels of oil pass through every single day. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this exercise was not routine, why Iran's latest warning is being systematically ignored by mainstream media, and why what happened on April 21st represents the most significant escalation in the Persian Gulf since the US assassination of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. This is analysis you will not find on cable news. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively discussed in classified briefings at the Pentagon, and you deserve to understand what is actually at stake. Let's start with the geography, because if you do not understand the Strait of Hormuz, you cannot possibly understand why Iran's latest action matters. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point. It is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, which is just under 39 kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the distance from downtown Manhattan to the northern tip of the Bronx. Now imagine that every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products flow through that narrow corridor. That represents roughly 21% of global petroleum liquids consumption, according to the US Energy Information Administration, and I am citing their March 2026 report directly. 3/4 of the oil that transits the Strait of Hormuz is destined for Asian markets. China alone imports approximately 10 million barrels per day through that route. Japan imports 2 million barrels per day. South Korea, 8 million. India, 1. These are not abstractions, these are the arteries of the global economy. Now here is what makes the strait uniquely vulnerable. The average depth is approximately 90 meters, which is about 295 feet. That is deep enough for supertankers, but shallow enough for diesel-electric submarines to sit silently on the seabed, completely undetectable by standard sonar arrays. U.S. Navy Captain James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, has stated publicly that the Strait of Hormuz represents the single most important strategic choke point in the world for energy security. That is not hyperbole, that is strategic reality. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of geographic and strategic context anywhere else. Now let's talk about what Iran actually deployed on April 21st and why it matters. Announcement number 1, the Ghadir-class submarines. And this one matters more than anything else happening in this theater right now. Iran currently operates between 14 and 19 Ghadir-class midget submarines. These are not the massive nuclear submarines that the United States and Russia operate. These are small diesel-electric vessels, approximately 29 meters long, with a crew of 18. They are designed specifically for one operational environment, shallow coastal waters. According to reporting by Defense Security Asia, and confirmed by multiple Western naval analysts, the Ghadir submarines have an operational depth range of 200 meters, a submerged speed of 11 knots, and most critically, what US Navy Commander Daniel Dolan has described as, and I am quoting him directly here, an acoustic signature so minimal that conventional sonar detection becomes operationally unreliable in cluttered shallow water environments. Think carefully about what that means. These submarines can sit on the floor of the Persian Gulf, completely silent, while supertankers worth $200 million in cargo pass overhead. They carry torpedoes, they carry mines, and according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, They can deploy intelligent naval mines capable of distinguishing between commercial vessels and military targets based on acoustic and magnetic signatures. On April 21st, Iran deployed 4 of these submarines as part of their exercise. That number matters. 4 submarines, positioned strategically across the shipping lanes, create overlapping fields of denial. You cannot sweep for them effectively because the water is too shallow and too acoustically noisy. Commercial shipping traffic, oil tankers, container ships, they all create constant background noise that masks submarine signatures. Commander Dolan acknowledged this limitation in testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee in February 2026. He stated, and again I am quoting directly, "Our ability to reliably detect and track diesel-electric submarines in the littoral waters of the Persian Gulf remains significantly degraded." Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the fast attack craft and the anti-ship cruise missiles. This is the part the Pentagon has confirmed but the media has largely ignored. Iran deployed 11 fast attack craft during this exercise. These are small, highly maneuverable vessels equipped with Chinese-designed C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles. Each C-802 has a range of approximately 120 kilometers, carries a 165-kilogram warhead, and travels at just under the speed of sound. The missiles use active radar homing in their terminal phase, which makes them exceptionally difficult to intercept once they lock onto a target. Now here is what makes this deployment significant. Fast attack craft operate using what military strategists call swarm tactics. You do not send one boat, you send 11 or 20 or 30, approaching from multiple vectors simultaneously, according to a 2024 war game conducted by the US Naval War College, and this was reported by the Wall Street Journal in November of that year. A coordinated swarm attack by Iranian fast attack craft against a US carrier strike group in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf would likely result in, and I am quoting the wargame conclusion, mission kills against multiple escorting vessels and significant damage to the carrier itself. The reason this matters is asymmetry. An Iranian fast attack craft costs approximately $2 million to build. A US Arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs $1, 8 billion. That is not a typo, billion with a B. Iran can afford to lose 10 fast attack craft for every destroyer the US loses, and it would still represent a strategic victory for Tehran. Admiral Ali Fadavi, the commander of the IRGC Navy, understands this arithmetic perfectly. He has stated publicly, multiple times, that Iran's naval strategy is predicated on making the cost of military intervention in the Persian Gulf strategically and economically untenable for the United States. On April 21st, those 11 fast attack craft did not just conduct drills. According to maritime tracking data analyzed by Stratfor, they established patrol patterns that effectively created interdiction zones across the main shipping lanes for 6 hours. Commercial vessels reported being shadowed by Iranian patrol boats at distances of less than 500 meters. That is not a routine exercise. That is a demonstration of capability and intent. Received. That is announcement number 2. Now stay with me, because this is where the timeline becomes critical and where the narrative you have been hearing from mainstream media completely falls apart. Announcement number 3. The diplomatic warning that was delivered 48 hours before the exercise, and almost nobody in Western media connected it correctly. On April 19th, 2 days before the naval exercise, Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian met with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing. This was reported, Reuters covered it, AP covered it, but what they did not report, or chose not to emphasize, was what Amir-Abdollahian said in the joint press conference afterward. He stated, and this is a direct translation from Farsi, that was confirmed by multiple regional outlets, Iran reserves the right to ensure the security of international waterways in accordance with international maritime law and will respond proportionally to any actions that threaten the free passage of commerce through the Persian Gulf. Now read that statement carefully. Ensure the security of international waterways, not defend Iranian territorial waters. The language is deliberate. Iran is positioning itself as the guarantor of maritime security in the Gulf, not as a disruptor. This is critical because it reframes the narrative. If Iran closes the strait, they are not attacking global commerce, they are responding to an external threat. That rhetorical framing matters enormously in international law and in how China, Russia, and the European Union respond. 48 hours after that statement, Iran deployed 23 naval vessels and established an active denial perimeter. The connection is not subtle. This was a scripted sequence, diplomatic warning, followed by military demonstration, followed by carefully calibrated messaging to regional media, emphasizing Iran's role as a defender of free navigation. The reason this announcement matters, and the reason you are not hearing about it on CNN or Fox News, is because it completely undermines the Western narrative that Iran is an irrational actor engaging in reckless brinkmanship. What Iran did on April 21st was not reckless, it was calculated, it was coordinated with China, and it was designed to send a very specific message. We can close this strait if we choose to, and we can do it in a way that makes us look like the aggrieved party defending international norms. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them, and barely even that. The story you are hearing, if you are hearing anything at all, is that Iran conducted a naval exercise. Routine stuff, happens all the time, nothing to see here. Maybe a paragraph on page 14 of the New York Times, maybe 30 seconds on the evening news sandwiched between celebrity gossip and weather updates. That is the official narrative. Iran is saber-rattling, business as usual. But here is the story you are not hearing. In the last 90 days, insurance premiums for commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz have increased by 340%. That is according to Lloyd's of London, the world's largest maritime insurance market, 340%. For context, during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when both countries were actively attacking tankers in what became known as the Tanker War, insurance premiums increased by roughly 200%. We are now seeing premiums higher than during an active shooting war, and this is happening during what the media is calling peacetime. Why? Because underwriters understand something the general public does not. They understand that Iran has spent the last 2 decades building a naval capability specifically designed to deny access to the Persian Gulf. They understand that the Ghadir submarines are operational and undetectable. They understand that the fast attack craft are numerous and expendable. And they understand that if a shooting war breaks out, their clients, the shipping companies, will lose vessels worth hundreds of millions of dollars, along with cargo worth potentially billions. Think carefully about what this represents. When insurance companies, whose entire business model depends on accurately pricing risk, are charging premiums 340% higher than baseline, that is not fear-mongering. That is a rational response to a tangible threat. These are people whose livelihoods depend on getting the math right. And the math they are doing right now says the Strait of Hormuz is a powder keg. Now here is where it gets even more revealing. On April 22nd, one day after Iran's exercise, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, issued a statement calling for de-escalation and dialogue in the Persian Gulf. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, standard diplomatic language. But here is what is interesting. The statement did not condemn Iran's naval exercise. It did not call on Tehran to cease military activities. Instead, it called on all parties to exercise restraint and to respect the principle of free navigation in international waters. All parties, not Iran specifically, all parties. That is diplomatic code. What Borrell is saying, without saying it explicitly, is that the European Union views this situation as a multi-sided problem, not a case of Iranian aggression. The EU is refusing to take the US position that Iran is the sole destabilizing actor here. Why? Because European economies are just as dependent on Gulf oil as Asian economies, and European leaders understand that if the strait closes, their energy prices will skyrocket. Germany imports approximately 34% of its crude oil from the Middle East, Italy 43%, Spain 51%. These countries cannot afford to alienate Iran, because doing so risks a supply disruption they cannot manage. So you have a situation where the United States is isolated in its hardline position, Europe is trying to maintain neutrality, and China is actively coordinating with Iran. That is not the narrative you are getting from mainstream media, but that is the reality on the ground. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta, the two great powers of ancient Greece, went to war. It lasted 27 years, Both sides exhausted themselves militarily, economically, and politically. Tens of thousands died, cities were destroyed, and who won? Persia, not Athens, not Sparta. Persia, the external power that sat back and watched the Greeks destroy each other, then stepped in and dominated the entire region for the next century. The parallel to today is exact. The United States is Athens, the established naval power trying to maintain hegemony through military dominance. Iran is Sparta, the land-based power using asymmetric tactics to challenge that dominance. And China is Persia, the rising power that is positioning itself to be the ultimate beneficiary of any conflict between the two. When the United States and Iran exhaust themselves in a confrontation over the Strait of Hormuz, who wins? China, not the United States, not Iran, China, because while Washington and Tehran are burning resources and political capital on a regional conflict, Beijing is building the infrastructure to dominate global trade for the next 50 years. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, these are not abstractions. These are the foundations of a post-American global order, and every day the United States spends focused on Iran is a day it is not countering China's strategic expansion. Iran understands this. That is why they coordinated their April 19th diplomatic messaging with Beijing. China understands this. That is why Wang Yi has made 11 trips to the Middle East in the last 18 months, mediating between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokering the restoration of diplomatic relations, positioning China as the indispensable power broker in the region. The United States, meanwhile, is still operating under the assumption that military superiority equals strategic dominance. It does not. Not anymore. Not in an era where a $2 million fast attack craft can mission kill a $1.8 billion destroyer, and where $20 million worth of submarines can shut down $4 trillion worth of annual oil trade. History does not repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And right now it is rhyming loudly. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Diplomatic de-escalation. The United States recognizes that military confrontation in the Persian Gulf carries unacceptable economic and strategic costs. Washington re-enters negotiations with Tehran, potentially reviving some version of the JCPOA nuclear agreement or establishing a new framework for Gulf security. Iran agrees to scale back naval activities in exchange for sanctions relief. China facilitates the negotiations and gains enormous diplomatic prestige. European economies stabilize. Oil prices decline. This is the optimistic scenario. For this path to materialize, several things would need to happen. The Biden administration, or whatever administration is in office, would need to prioritize de-escalation over domestic political optics. That means withstanding criticism from hardliners who will accuse any negotiation of appeasement. It means accepting that Iran will maintain some level of influence in the region, and it means coordinating with China rather than treating Beijing as an adversary in every context. Likelihood, I would put it at 30%. Possible, but requires political courage that has been in short supply in Washington for the last decade. Path 2. Contained escalation. The situation continues to simmer. Iran conducts periodic naval exercises that disrupt shipping, but stop short of closing the strait entirely. The United States maintains a naval presence, but avoids direct confrontation. Insurance premiums remain elevated. Oil prices stay volatile. Occasional incidents occur. Iranian fast attack craft shadowing US destroyers, close calls, maybe even a limited exchange of fire, but both sides pull back before it spirals into full-scale war. This is the muddled middle scenario, where nobody wins but nobody catastrophically loses either. This path is the most likely in my assessment, approximately 55% probability. Why? Because it serves the political needs of both Washington and Tehran. The United States can claim it is maintaining freedom of navigation without actually risking a war it cannot afford. Iran can claim it is defending its sovereignty and supporting regional resistance movements without provoking an overwhelming American response. Both sides posture, both sides save face, and the global economy absorbs the cost through higher energy prices and supply chain disruptions. Path 3. Military confrontation and strait closure. This is the scenario nobody wants to talk about, but that becomes increasingly probable the longer the current trajectory continues. An incident occurs, Maybe an Iranian fast attack craft fires on a US vessel. Maybe a US airstrike hits an IRGC facility, and the situation escalates beyond anyone's ability to control it. Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz using submarines and mines. Oil exports from the Gulf cease. Global oil prices spike to $200, $250, potentially $300 per barrel. The world enters an energy crisis that makes the 1970s oil shocks look minor by comparison. The United States launches airstrikes against Iranian naval facilities. Iran retaliates with ballistic missile strikes against US bases in the region and against Saudi and Emirati oil infrastructure. The global economy enters recession. China, which has been stockpiling oil reserves and building alternative supply routes through Russia and Central Asia, emerges as the dominant economic power while the West hemorrhages resources. Likelihood, I would put it at 15%. Low probability, but catastrophic consequences. The reason I am not dismissing it entirely is because escalation spirals are inherently unpredictable. Both the United States and Iran believe they can manage controlled escalation. History suggests they are wrong. The First World War started because everyone thought they could manage a limited Balkans crisis. The Iran-Iraq War escalated because both sides believed the other would back down. When you have two powers committed to demonstrating resolve, and when you have military assets in close proximity operating under rules of engagement that leave minimal room for error, accidents happen, and accidents become crises, and crises become wars. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, but the risk of slipping into path 3 increases every time Iran conducts an exercise like the one on April 21st, and the United States responds with silence or minimal diplomatic pushback. Silence is not strength. Silence is ambiguity, and ambiguity in a crisis is dangerous. Here are the questions I want you to take away from this analysis. First, why is mainstream media systematically ignoring or downplaying Iran's naval activities in the Strait of Hormuz when those activities carry such enormous economic implications? Second, what does it tell you that European allies are refusing to back the US position and are instead calling for dialogue? And third, how does China benefit from continued US-Iran confrontation? And what does that tell you about the broader strategic competition playing out across the Middle East and Asia? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you think we are on path 1, path 2, or path 3. Tell me what indicators you are watching to assess which direction this situation is heading. We will keep tracking every development in the Persian Gulf, every diplomatic signal, every maritime incident, because this story is not going away. If anything, it is accelerating. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in the Strait of Hormuz and why it matters for global energy security, for your gas prices, for the stability of the global economy. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update when Iran makes its next move, because they will. That is what the data tells us, that is what the history tells us, and that is what happens when a rising regional power collides with a declining global hegemon in the world's most important energy choke point. We will see you in the next analysis.